They say cold preserves the dead, that it stops rot, slows time. Whoever said that never lived long enough to realize how wrong they were. Cold doesn't stop death. It just teaches it patience. I've been in this bunker for 3 winters too long. Could have been more. You lose track after a while. Only thing keeping me grounded are the marks on the door and the sounds outside. Most nights are silent. Not peaceful, just quiet. The kind of silence that hums under your skin makes you listen harder, like the world is holding its breath. But this morning was different. At 0400, the outer vents hissed, ice shifting. Something brushed the entry hatch. Nothing big, nothing loud, but enough to make the frost fall from the ceiling. Enough to wake me. And nothing's woken me in months. I checked the monitors. Static. I checked the pressure seals. Still holding. But something was there. The dead don't make noise anymore. Not like before, when they howled and slammed and clawed. They've learned. Or maybe the cold just taught them stillness. I've only seen them move once this winter. A group of 5, half frozen together, dragging themselves through a snow corridor like they were dreaming the memory of walking. One of them still had a child's backpack on. I watched them from the old tower lens until they disappeared into the white. Back then, I thought maybe it was over. That they were breaking down. That winter had won. Now I'm not so sure. The bunker's called Orchid Station, leftover from Cold War times. They built it deep, beneath a mountain spine where satellites wouldn't find it. Triple reinforced walls, geothermal backup, analog control systems. It wasn't meant for comfort. It was meant to outlive the surface. And it did. The old Soviet diagrams call it a forward observation platform. But it's more than that. There's an armory, cryo bays, server stacks that haven't hummed in over a decade. Most of it's dead metal now. What still works is what I scavenge and rewire. I've made it livable. If you can call living here anything close to that. The routine keeps me sane. Wake, monitor. Inspect ration. Record. Repeat. Boredom is a blessing. A day with nothing new is a day I didn't die. But this morning, there were marks on the outer hatch. 3 of them. Not scratches, not tools. Fingers, pressed deep into the frost. Bare skin, bare pressure. Not enough to break through, but enough to leave a message. They were still warm when I touched them. I don't believe in signs. The world doesn't care about omens. But the warmth, that shouldn't have been possible. Not at -50. Not on steel. Not after 13 years. And definitely not from something dead. I thought about going up. Just a peek. But that's how people die in stories. Curiosity and bad timing. I don't die for nothing. Instead, I ran a full systems check. Vents secure. Cameras down. Again. Thermal nodes flickering low. Everything degrading faster than it should. Maybe the cold's changing. Or maybe the station isn't as airtight as I thought. I did the one thing I always do when I feel it slipping. I recorded it. Audio log 946. Unidentified thermal signature detected at hatch 3. Manual override remains locked. External anomaly, handprints, 3. Pressure depth, moderate. No signs of breach. Possible adaptive behavior. Sounds clinical when you say it like that. Makes it easier not to panic. A long time ago when the outbreak was new and the world still had power, I read a theory. Said the cold would be our salvation. Zombies couldn't regulate heat. They'd seize up, freeze over. And for a while, that was true. Cities in the north lasted longer. The infected slowed. Gave people time to build walls, roots, rules. But cold doesn't stop a virus. It just slows the burn. And if the host doesn't die completely, it has time to learn. Somewhere in the last decade, they changed. They cluster now, hibernate almost. And when they move smart, coordinated, deliberate. I've seen them crawl out of vents in formation, like insects in a swarm. And now, they're leaving heat signatures. Something about that scratches a nerve I can't reach. I checked the emergency protocols after breakfast. There's a failsafe buried in the mainframe. Thaw protocol, it's called. The irony doesn't escape me. It's supposed to heat the entire complex to 80 Celsius in under 10 minutes. Kills contaminants, burns out viruses. The theory was, if the bunker was ever compromised, they'd boil it clean. I've never used it. Takes too much power. But just knowing it's there makes me feel like I have an option. That matters more than I want to admit. I slept for an hour, maybe 2. When I woke up, the fingers were gone, melted, or wiped away. But the hatch was warm again. And this time, there was something under it. A sound. Not banging, not scratching. Breathing. Software controlled. Alive. I'm making a plan now. Tomorrow, I'll take the east shaft and surface through Tunnel 6. The old drone garage should still open from the manual crank. From there, I'll get eyes on the area near the hatch. See if anything left tracks. See if it's just me losing it. Because the other option, that something out there is watching the heat, learning how to find it, that's worse than madness. That's evolution. Last night, before the system cycled down, I caught a flicker on the old motion grid. Just for a second. There were 6 signatures. Standing still. Right outside the perimeter. They didn't move. Didn't walk. Didn't try to enter. They just stood there. Like they were waiting for something. The old drone garage door groaned like it hadn't been touched in decades. Ice snapped off its hinges in thick sheets as I turned the manual crank. Cold air flooded the tunnel like a living thing, sinking into my bones. My breath turned to fog inside my mask. Tunnel 6 had collapsed in some sections. Roots of black ice pushed through the cracks like veins. I stepped around them carefully. Too many years alone have taught me the difference between a crunch that echoes and one that calls back. I reached the exit hatch and engaged the outer release. No alarms. Just the hiss of depressurization and the sudden suffocating silence of the frozen world above. The surface hadn't changed. Still a blanket of dead snow stretching to the horizon. Still the skeletal remains of rusted antenna towers clawing at the sky. And still the cold, sharp and unrelenting, like a knife pressed to your ribs. But the ground told a different story. Tracks. Not human. Not animal. 6 sets, each one dragging slightly as if the feet weren't quite in sync with the legs. Bare prints. Long, narrow. Almost elegant. And warm. Melted into the snow, each step left a faint steam trail, as if whatever made them carried its own heat. I followed the tracks to the perimeter fence. They stopped right at the sensor post, just below the camera dome. Then, nothing. No retreat, no turn, just gone. Like they'd vanished, or climbed. Back inside, I rechecked the logs. The thermal sensors were degrading, sure, but not hallucinating. 6 distinct thermal spikes. Each one hovered at human body temperature, slightly lower, around 94 degrees Fahrenheit. That's not ambient. That's intentional. They're generating heat, maintaining it. That shouldn't be possible, unless the virus changed, or it remembered. There's an old theory buried in the early outbreak archives, something called biological thermal mimicry. It was speculation, mostly, said that some strains of the infected had begun adapting to their environment, that flesh, when forced to evolve, could learn to store warmth. Back then, no one believed it. We thought the infected were mindless, that they couldn't plan, couldn't adjust. But they've been in the cold a long time, just like me. And if survival forces intelligence, then maybe we're not the only ones who've been thinking. The geothermal heating system flickered today. First time since I reactivated the core coils. I don't think it's a malfunction. I think they're testing the station, pressuring the systems, listening. I caught another breathing pattern near hatch 3. Different cadence this time. Slower, measured. It was like it knew I was listening. I found something while searching the archives. An old audio file logged by the original station commander. Date stamped 6 years before the fall. Command Protocol Omega-7 engaged. Observation suggests reanimated subjects display memory link behavior. Subject Delta-3 returned to site of death at 0400 hours. Remained for 42 minutes. No action taken. Just stood there, watching. Shivering. Even though ambient temperature was minus 31 degrees Celsius, flesh remembers warmth. Or maybe it remembers what it was. Either way, it's learning. The file ends with a power surge and a scream. No follow-up, no retrieval order, just silence. Sometimes I wonder if survival isn't just about the body. Maybe it's about memory. Maybe the virus preserved more than tissue. Maybe it kept longing. What happens when the dead remember how it felt to be warm? I ventured into the sub-basement today. The oldest part of Orchid Station, not on the blueprints. The air was stale, heavy with dust and frost-bitten mold. I had to pry open the server hatch by hand. What I found inside shouldn't exist. Rows of storage pods, biochambers mostly shattered. Old experiments, the kind you only see in declassified leaks. But one pod still worked. Inside, a corpse, or something close to one. Eyes white, lips blue, skin like paper stretched too tight. But hooked to the pod's vitals, the internal body temp held steady. 93.7 degrees Fahrenheit, the same as the prints outside. It was hooked to an IV, some kind of chemical circulation system. The file next to the pod was labeled Project Lazarus Cold Retention Protocol Beta Strain 03. I don't know what they made down here, but it never left. Or it did, and came back. I'm not alone here. I don't mean the things outside. I mean something inside Orchid Station. Sometimes when I walk the dark corridors and the ones without power, without lights, I hear the vents move. Not mechanical, breathing. Like the station itself is exhaling, and the air is just a little too warm. This bunker was supposed to save people. But the logs show no outbound traffic, no rescue orders, no extraction. Just experiment after experiment. Every one of them aimed at one thing. Survival in absolute zero conditions. I think they succeeded. I think they made something that doesn't need to live to stay warm. And now that thing remembers how to get back home. Tonight the power failed for 12 seconds. Not a system glitch. A cut. Every backup should have kicked in, but none did. When the lights came back, my security door was open. I didn't leave it that way. And in the frost on the floor, I found a handprint. Still warm. Still wet. I don't sleep anymore, not really. I close my eyes, I count the flickers in the emergency lights. I listen to the creaks of metal contracting in the cold. And I wait for a noise that doesn't belong. Last night it came. A knock. Not pounding. Not mindless. A knock. 3 short raps on the metal of the main elevator shaft. Then silence. Then another knock. Slower. Almost cautious. They know where I am. They're not breaking in. They're asking.
The breach doctrine was designed for Cold War-era infiltration. If the Soviets ever cracked the facility, the AI would lock down all exit points, vent oxygen, and sterilize every level with thermite bursts. I read about it once in a dusty old paper manual titled Classified Breach Protocol Black Ice. Problem is, Orchid Station never completed its upgrade. The doctrine was disabled in 2006, deemed obsolete. Now I wonder if it was just paused. Because this morning I found a console alert flashing in red. Breach doctrine dormant, auth override required. Someone or something is trying to turn it back on. I traced the override signal to sublevel 4. That level's supposed to be sealed, no access, no power, but the signal's real. It's coming from the old cryo labs. I armed myself with one of the last pulse rifles left in storage. Most of the energy cells were dead, corroded. I found one that still held a charge, enough for maybe 2-3 shots. Not much, but better than nothing. The door to sublevel 4 groaned open like a dying animal. Inside, the air was humid. Steam clung to the walls, rising from broken vents. Strange, considering it's -40 outside. The heating grid for this level had been reactivated, manually. And in the moisture-slick hallway, footprints, barefoot, too long, too thin, with strange splayed toes like heat-melted webbing. No blood, no drag, just steps. Calculated, purposeful. I followed them to Lab 4C, past rooms filled with shattered containment tubes and frostbitten cadavers. Inside 4C, the lights were dim, the emergency red spinning lazily. A bank of consoles blinked with old data logs looping endlessly. But what caught my eye was the figure standing in the corner. Still, motionless, watching, not breathing. Pale skin stretched too tightly over a skeletal frame, eyes sunken but open, alert. Not wild, focused, and it radiated heat, enough to fog the glass. It didn't move until I spoke. I didn't even mean to. But the words slipped out like they were waiting for a witness. What are you? Its mouth opened slowly, like muscle memory was foreign. When it spoke, the voice was jagged, like it was mimicking speech more than knowing it. Remnant of adaptation. I should have fired, should have run, but it didn't attack. It just stared, then pointed to the data terminal. A single word blinked on screen. Breach. It stepped backward into the darkness and vanished. I downloaded the terminal logs. Most were corrupted, but a few files had integrity. One stood out, Doctrine Override / auth key. Biosignature D 3.9, hybrid clearance. Inside the log was a name, Dr. Cale Harmon, not military, civilian scientist. Last log entry was 11 years ago. Subject Delta is adapting too quickly, it's learning heat conservation, mimicry, even voice. If it escapes the vault, breach doctrine must be triggered. It is not human. It remembers being human. And it is angry. This is my final record. I am activating the fail-safe. If you're reading this, the surface is no longer safe. I cross-referenced Dr. Harmon's biosignature with the station medical files. Blood type, AB negative. Genetic markers, triple helix stability sequence. That's not natural. He was experimenting on himself. I think that thing in the lab was him, or something that used to be. And I think he's trying to finish what he started. The doctrine override continued ticking on the mainframe. A countdown had started. 48 hours. Then the system purges itself and everything in the station. I had a choice. Let it run and destroy whatever these things are becoming, or stop it and maybe learn what they're evolving into. Before I could decide, the breach alarm sounded. Level 1 motion detected. North exit corridor. I checked the cameras. Nothing at first. Then, movement. Shadows spilling forward, dozens of them. Thin, elongated. Some hunched, some crawling. Not zombies. Not quite. Evolved. They weren't running. They were moving with purpose, eyes glowing faintly from residual thermal cores embedded in their skulls. Technology fused into them like they didn't just survive the cold. They became it. One looked up into the camera, directly at it, at me. Its mouth moved. No sound. But I could read the shape of the word. Open. Then the feed went black. When I was a kid, my father used to tell me that warmth was a gift, a human thing. He'd say even a fire knows how to burn, but only people know how to share it. I think about that now as the facility's temperature begins to climb, not from the heating grid, but from them. The evolved, the ones at the North Corridor who looked into the camera and whispered, "Open." I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I watched as they stood motionless at the sealed hatch. No banging, no screeching. Just waiting. Then they started to heat the door. The steel turned dark, misted and groaned under pressure. Not with fire, not with torches. With their bodies. They radiated warmth, controlled, focused, directed. Like they were rediscovering instincts we forgot. Like evolution had figured out how to weaponize need. And beneath it all, the security feed showed one line flashing in sequence. Contact temperature threshold approaching critical. I ran back to the lower levels. Sub-level 4, the cryo vaults. I wanted answers. The hallway that had once been still and slick with condensation was now dry, warm, and someone, or something, had written on the wall with their finger through the frost. Ashwarm. At first I didn't understand. Then I saw the incinerator chamber. Its door was cracked open. Ash lined the floor in messy handprints, not scattered, not chaotic, placed, like fingerprints pressed into snow, a reminder someone was becoming something else. And in the center of the room was a burnt-out jumpsuit. Tag, Harmon. A data terminal near the incinerator powered itself on. The logs resumed from where I left off. The protocol was never meant to save us. It was meant to erase the mistake before it reached the surface. But we underestimated it. The mutation isn't just a virus or a splicing error. It's adaptive memory. It learns, stores, then rewrites. Ashwarm isn't a term. It's what they call themselves now. Fire used to be ours. Now it's theirs. Above me, the first breach occurred. Main corridor door integrity. Compromised. The feed cut to black. Static poured in. No screaming, no gunshots, just static. I armed what was left of the defense grid. Arc traps. Proximity bursts. But I knew they wouldn't hold for long. These weren't the shambling dead. These were cold-born predators that had learned heat wasn't just survival. It was control. On sub-level 2, I found the greenhouse vault. Abandoned since the blackout. Temperature had once dropped below freezing, flash killing every plant. But now things had begun to regrow. Slow. Twisted. Vines with frost-cracked stems curled toward a portable heating unit someone had dragged in. And nestled among the dead soil was something I hadn't seen in years. Footprints, small ones, human, not dragged, walked. I followed them to the far side of the greenhouse, through a busted maintenance hatch and into a crawl space no wider than my shoulders. And there, in the pale blue glow of emergency lights, sat a girl, maybe 15, wrapped in layers of old thermal jackets with a homemade filtration mask covering her face. Her eyes were sunken but sharp. She didn't flinch when I approached. She held out a cracked data slate and played back a voice log. If you find this, they're not all gone. We've been adapting too. The ashwarm aren't evil. They're confused, lost. Something hurt them, long before the virus, long before the thaw. You don't have to destroy them, you can reach them. The girl stopped the recording and spoke, barely more than a whisper. He was my brother, one of the first to change. I asked her name. She didn't give it. She just said, "We still remember fire." Then came the quake. Not seismic, not natural. An internal blast. Sabotage. Back to the command center, I found the breach doctrine countdown had accelerated. A message blinked on screen. Ashwarm override detected. Initiating manual thermite cycle. They were trying to stop the doctrine.
They didn't want to destroy the facility. They wanted to inhabit it. Or maybe something worse. As I stood there deciding whether to trigger the failsafe or let the countdown run, the girl handed me another voice log. Hers this time. You don't have to end it like this. We're not what we were, and maybe neither are you. The virus didn't just kill us. It offered us a question. What would you become to survive the cold? I have one charge left in the pulse rifle. One shot, enough to overload the core, to make sure nothing survives, or enough to take the girl's hand, lead her out, and try to find whatever version of humanity might be left above the snow. But even now, in the control room, the walls are warm, too warm, and on the far monitor, the ashwarm wait. Not attacking, not fleeing, just standing there, as if waiting for me to evolve too. The snow outside hasn't stopped in 13 years, but tonight, it glows. Through the breach in the upper tunnel, where the ashwarm came through, I saw it for the first time. Flurries of white drifting slow and silent through shafts of thermal light, like ash falling in reverse. It was no longer just weather. It was a signal, a transition. The world hadn't died in fire or ice. It had entered something after both. I stood there, beside the girl, listening to the hum of the backup grid, the last thing keeping this place powered. Her voice, still low, pulled me back. It's starting. The last phase. How do you know? She tilted her head toward the snow. Because they're singing. I listened harder. She was right. Not music exactly, but a frequency. A layered resonance. Vibrations echoing through the ice tunnels, like voices calling in harmony from under the world. The ashwarm were communicating, and they weren't hiding anymore. System logs flashed red on the control panels. Thermal breach, level 3. External hatch, alpha open, manual override. Firewall deactivated. Something, or someone, had turned the failsafe grid off. I grabbed the pulse rifle and led the girl down toward the hatch chamber. Footprints in the frost, dozens, too uniform, too deliberate, no shuffling, no chaos, like soldiers trained in the dark. At the end of the corridor, I found Harmon, or what was left of him, standing upright, awake, alive. His body glowed faintly beneath frostbitten skin, veins illuminated like wires. His voice cracked, as if relearning how to speak. We didn't die. We shed. I raised the weapon. He didn't flinch. We remembered what you forgot, that fire was never just warmth, it was change. And now, we burned clean. The girl stepped in front of me. He's not hostile. I didn't lower the rifle. I couldn't. Because behind him, more figures emerged. 12, maybe 20. All of them glowing faintly, breath visible in the air but never shivering. One knelt and placed a hand on the ice. The frost evaporated under his touch. We learned from your bunkers, your labs, your weapons, but you locked yourself away and forgot how to adapt. We didn't. A sudden quake shook the corridor. Monitors blinked black. One final alert buzzed through the radio system. External thermal event detected. I rushed back to the control chamber. Satellite feed restored, only for a moment. And there it was, a white flare rising from the northern hemisphere, blinding, expanding. The final trigger of the thaw protocol, not a missile, not a bomb. A global ignition, something to melt the last of the frost, to erase the infected zones, and anyone left inside.
"Is this it?" I asked. The girl looked up at the monitor, her expression unreadable. "This isn't the apocalypse. It's the afterburn." We had minutes, maybe less. I opened the emergency transit tunnels. One led to the surface, an old atmospheric silo, dangerous, possibly buried. Another led down, farther into geothermal veins. The ashwarm had already chosen. Down, into heat, into survival. They beckoned me. But before I followed, I triggered one last command. Pulse package. Upload memcore to orbital loop, a capsule, carrying data, recordings. The truth. If anyone up there's still listening, they'll know. Not all of us forgot how to adapt. As I descended with the girl, the temperature rose. Frost dripped from the ceiling in slow tears. Lights dimmed, then brightened, struggling to remain alive. We reached a cavern older than the war, older than the outbreak. Steam hissed from the walls, and inside, they waited. Dozens more, maybe hundreds, not undead, not human, something new. Their eyes were open, calm. Their skin glowed dim amber, and they were warm. I turned back one last time, up that long shaft of metal and ash toward the silence of the frozen world above, the world that never thawed fast enough. And then I stepped forward into a new fire, not to burn, but to become.